One of the main issues the alliance is facing now is the need to secure long-term support for Ukraine. To discuss some of the possible measures which could be taken, we're joined by Justyna Gotkowska from the Center for Eastern Studies. Good morning, pleasure to have you with us.
Good morning, thank you for having me.
So let me start by asking you about some of these measures that still could be taken before possibly Donald Trump takes office in November.
Well, the first and most important topic for the NATO-Washington summit will be, of course, further cooperation of NATO with Ukraine. And NATO will take breakthrough decisions in this regard. First of all, it will take over the coordination of military support delivered to Ukraine from the NATO countries. This support has been so far coordinated by the US, and now before the US presidential elections, and that was also the reasons for this decision, NATO will do much more in this regard, will take over the coordination, will build up a separate command for ensuring that Ukraine gets the military equipment and arms it needs. So that will be the first decision made in Washington. The second one, probably, but this is still in negotiation, that will be a commitment of all allies to provide Ukraine with a concrete number of funds for military deliveries each year. So the talk was about 40 billion euros of financial commitments to Ukraine, but we will see whether this sum will be agreed in Washington or not.
All right, and there's still a gap between making a commitment to the funds actually arriving in Ukraine. We have discussions with NATO liaison talking about this particular topic. Do you think this upcoming Washington summit in NATO will not just only be able to coordinate and come up with a commitment, but actually being able to support Ukraine with any other immediate needs?
I think that this will be an important decision with regard to coordination of military deliveries. What NATO has been so far working upon was the coordination of non-military help to Ukraine. So that will be continued. Financial commitment, as I mentioned, will be another issue. And I suppose the allies will discuss how further strengthen relations between NATO and Ukraine under the auspices of NATO-Ukraine Council, how to develop programs that make Ukraine more capable with regard to its military, more capable to introduce some reforms and some actions to improve the military performance overall. So I think that will be an issue. And another one, also controversial, that will be the language in which will be in the final communique from the NATO Washington summit, which will talk about whether or not or how close NATO wants Ukraine to come, whether that will be an invitation or whether that will be a kind of another formulation signifying how close the allies want Ukraine with regard to NATO membership.
Right, let me go back to the question of funding. There's this 40 billion for 2025, if I'm not mistaken. However, Jens Stoltenberg has failed so far to secure long-term commitments, right, from NATO member states to financing Ukraine. So my question is, why would it change now?
Because we need an outcome from the summit, because that has been in the press already. So not agreeing on a specific sum will be perceived as or might be perceived as a failure of this summit, and therefore it's of course not for us. We cannot predict what will be the outcome, but I suppose that some formulation of financial commitment will be there in the final communique. Whether that will be 40 billion or whether that will be more general, we'll see. But I think that due to all the press coverage before the summit, we will see something coming out from the Washington summit.
Right, you brought up something that I want to expand on when it comes to the language of how close that NATO actually wants Ukraine. And this is something that I always find a little bit perplexing when it comes to the mixed messaging and maybe a little bit lack of transparency there, if you will, where a lot of us in this part of the world are kind of holding out hopes that NATO will be accepting Ukraine into its rank. And while other commentators have been saying that they don't even accept them as a NATO ally, let alone a full-fledged NATO member. My question would be, of course, there's going to be controversies of whether or not they'll be a part of NATO, but why the lack of transparency and the lack of a clear communication on where exactly Ukraine stands?
I will start with saying that NATO agreed 2008 in Bucharest that Ukraine one day will become a member of the alliance. And I think everyone agrees upon that, and we have that in the communiqué, that Ukraine will become a NATO member one day. The question is when NATO extends an invitation to Ukraine, because this opens a more clearer path to membership. And this is an issue where the allies are not in agreement, and where Ukraine wants this invitation. Northeastern allies in NATO support Ukraine's stance, but there are most important allies, as the US, Germany, that do not want to take this decision and do not want to go that far. And this is because of the ongoing war and the conviction that extending an invitation to Ukraine might involve NATO in one or another way more in the Ukrainian-Russian war, which Washington and Berlin are very wary of. So now we are discussing the language. We had the controversial language from the Vilnius summit, where until the very recent minute, the leaders of NATO countries discussed how that should be shaped. Now we are talking about a bridge, providing Ukraine a bridge to NATO membership, and I suppose we'll stay with with this language slightly modified.
So let me ask you about people now a little bit. So Jens Stoltenberg's term is ending. Mark Rutte will take over, and also Mircea Joanna will stop being Deputy Secretary General. So who will replace him? There's some hope that this could be a person from Central Europe.
So we know who will be the next Secretary General from October. That will be Mark Rutte. We do not know about the Deputy Secretary General. Of course, there are various rumors who this person might be. Poland also wanted to have its own representatives for this position, but I suppose that whether we will know this information at the Washington summit, I'm not sure. The discussion about that might be prolonged.
All right, going back to that we've just discussed with Ukraine's potential membership into NATO, we do have a guest that told us earlier that he finds it frustrating in a sense that these topics are front and center while there's already more that NATO could have been doing instead of the very relatively far-fetched goal of making Ukraine a far-fetched member, like for example accepting Ukraine as a NATO ally, which can be done just like from the will of the United States alone, or more military support that could have been delivered. And according to his summary, he actually do believe that some of these discussion about becoming a full-fledged member is somewhat of a distraction to not address the actual issue. Do you think that's a little bit harsh when it comes to criticism of NATO, or do you think there is a little bit of reluctance there to kind of just actually address some of the more urgent issues at hand because they can't come to a consensus?
Well, I think with regard to the membership of Ukraine in NATO, this issue will come up when the war is over, when we'll have truce, and then I think the majority of allies, the US, Germany, and possibly also France, would like to discuss the NATO membership for Ukraine in earnest. When that will come, I'm not sure. We'll see. That depends on the course of the war. But we will have also changes. We have political changes in the major NATO allies. And we have the US presidential elections. And from the outcome and from the stance of the next presidents, a lot depends. Because the US is the driving force and all that. The US did not want to engage NATO in more military support of Ukraine. It is the Rammstein group that takes control over all the military deliveries. So that was a very conscious political decision on part of Washington not to involve NATO in this war to a large extent. Now it is, we will have a change of this strategy. We will see whether we might get more after the US presidential election, but that depends hugely on the outlook from Washington, how the situation on the battlefield look like, whether we will have a correction of the strategy towards this war.
Right, definitely a lot to look out for.
Justyna Gotkowska, Center for Eastern Studies, thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Thank you.